Hey, deserving listeners, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard trial. Let's watch.
Him and trying to convince him. So March started with this picture of him doing a shot, and he's kind of saying, let's send it to your dad to show support. And what I remember of March is just like an almost, it's almost like it was a never-ending fight. It was just, there were breaks in it. What kept me in it is because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, the sobriety shoe, if you will. I kept waiting for him to get to the point where it's not supportable or anymore, and he's done with it and he's ready to get clean and sober again, because there commences a period.
Okay, so I haven't been reacting to everything that she's been saying because she was talking generally and not giving us an anecdote to grab onto. But just to catch you up, she's talking about how he was jealous, which I can believe, and that he would become obsessive about who she was hanging out with. And there was a painting from a previous partner of hers that Johnny would look at it and says, you know, that's proof that you're sleeping with her and all that kind of stuff. And so could that have happened? Yeah, I could absolutely see that happening given what we've seen. Is it possible it's exaggerated? Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. I find that to be believable. And she's saying that also when he was on Quaaludes, that was different than when he was on Coke, which is different when he was drinking, which is also absolutely true. I mean, there's no way for that not to be true, because that's just a true statement. You know, when your partner is on a heavy amount of alcohol as opposed to a heavy amount of cocaine, as opposed to a heavy amount of opiates, as opposed to Quaaludes, then yeah, that's different. And of course, there's different combinations thereof. And she says that she was very much paying attention to his drug use and what state he was in, which I also don't doubt. It is the prime directive of someone with borderline to pay very close attention, because they're really hypervigilant about trying to avoid rejection and retain closeness. And so they pay so much attention to the other person that they don't even pay attention to themselves, which is a huge problem. And partially they pay attention to the people because they don't even know what to look at when they look at themselves. But she is describing that, which sounded believable, and the way she described it sounded there weren't any, didn't seem to be any speed bumps in her cadence and that sort of thing, but who knows. So yeah, all that is believable. I find that to be congruent with the way I was piecing together my profile of Johnny Depp.
And how did you sustain that bruise, Amber?
I had thrown Johnny slapped me. I walked away from him, and that made it worse. We got into like a...
Okay, again, I guess I'm gonna go into conspiracy mode. So she is showing a picture of a bruise on her arm, and she is asked to tell the story, and she says, she starts it off by saying, I threw something at, well, actually, he slapped me first. Is that her messing up the storyline? Because that's the truth, that she was the aggressor to start with, and then he responded. Not that it makes that okay that he responded, but I don't know. What do you think?
A shouting match. And he kind of...
By the way, I said this in the comments reaction video a couple weeks ago, because I just recorded that comments video yesterday, but someone commented that the sound I thought was someone chewing gum or a pen is the stenographer, because of course it's the stenographer, because that's the sound that it makes. And I feel so stupid for not realizing that, and it makes it so much more palatable, tolerable. It's still kind of a little bothersome, like, can't you mute the mic? I'm guessing the stenographer has a microphone, like it seems like you would be able to mute that, but anyway. And I just feel so much better that I know that now, because to think that someone would be chewing gum in the microphone in that way was very distressing to me.
I did this thing with his body where I could tell he was going to hit me again. I picked up I remember it kind of like a little pot, not a pot, but like a vase. And I remember I got away from him enough as he reels back. I threw it in his direction.
Again, I don't think you're helping your case. She thinks, and I guess the legal team, Amber Heard legal team, thinks this story helps. Well, I guess it all just depends on how you define her statement and the words she used, that she was a victim of abuse. And could you make the case that it's not slander? Could a reasonable person have had those experiences where there was mutual violence between the two of them and conclude that she was a survivor of abuse? No. I mean, unless it was defensive, right? Which is possible. It's possible that, but you don't usually hear that. Like when someone is attacking a victim and the victim is trying to defend themselves with violence, it's usually pushing, because that of course makes sense. And if you're larger or you have more leverage, you might actually get a good push. The perpetrator might even fall down the stairs or something, particularly if they're intoxicated. That would be a defensive, violent act that one would say was justified, potentially. Of course, you don't want to try to get them to fall down the stairs. It could kill them. But anyway, the other behaviors you'll hear are grabbing and restraining. We heard Johnny Depp talking about that. Trying to punch someone in the face like this to try to get away from someone. Maybe trying to trip someone, I suppose. But anyway, that's typically defensive acts. We don't usually, and there are others, of course. You might even just haul off and hit someone as a way of trying to defend yourself because you're backed into a corner or something. That could certainly happen. Or you just get pushed to a level you've been hit so many times that you just come out swinging. But we don't hear people defensively throwing vases at their perpetrators. I mean, that could happen, certainly, but that wouldn't, I don't think it would occur to most victims as a way of trying to defend themselves. I'm going to throw this large object at their head, but it's possible. Now, we saw or heard accounts of her throwing various different things, and the accounts did not seem to indicate defensive throwing of things. So what do we believe here? I would guess that if we had a videotape of the situation, that they escalated, they were triggering each other, and her issues were being triggered, his issues were being triggered, and they were being real nasty to each other. He was probably highly intoxicated, and she threw something at him, and then he came after her. Doesn't make it okay, but that's just my guess. And then the bruise is from him. And it's telling, again, it doesn't help their case if you piece it all together, because that would be consistent with someone that's trying to restrain, right? That was consistent with his story previous and would make sense to a defensive, violent act that would cause a bruise, right? The bloody nose, or at least the bumped nose, we could absolutely explain by he's bear hugging someone who was flailing at him. We've heard from witnesses. You could say that the witnesses were biased because they're employees of Johnny Depp. But, that one bodyguard told the jury they were yelling at each other and that Johnny was giving as much as he was getting. So that lends to credibility. He put that in. That kind of harms Johnny Depp to some extent. And meanwhile, Amber is throwing stuff at him and then punches him, and then the bodyguard says, "We're going," and actually drags a resisting Johnny Depp away, because Johnny Depp is like, I think what Johnny would typically do, and we heard this from another bodyguard, that when she would throw something at him, he would puff up and say, "Is that all you got? Is that all you got?" So I think he was kind of doing that sort of thing. And so anyway, the bodyguard takes him away, and then Johnny pretty quickly starts to berate the bodyguard for doing that, right? So those stories, those details don't help Johnny Depp's team, but it does lend itself to a credible story. Now, could a different scenario be happening in this situation that Amber is talking about? Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like they were at each other's throats, literally and figuratively, very, very frequently. And in fact, I didn't react to this part, but she was talking about how she doesn't remember all the times that these sorts of things happen. She's like, I don't know, it was either this time or that time. And I think she also said something like, I don't know how many times these sorts of things happen. So that one tells us that the conflict was very common. Two, it also puts into question her memory on specific incidents, because it sounds like it happened all the time, but who knows? So the bruise would be consistent with she's telling the court she threw something at him. Now, you could argue that lends itself to credibility for her, that she is admitting something that doesn't help her case, but she's trying to paint a picture and she wants to be truthful, and so she wants to come across as truthful. But I don't know. I could absolutely see her having initiated the violence and that he grabbed her in defense, maybe even in a very hostile, forceful way to try to hurt her, in addition to trying to restrain her. I don't know.
And actually managed to get away before he got me. He grabbed me by the arm, and he kind of just held me on the floor, screaming at me. I don't know how many times he hit me in the face, but I remember being on the floor of my apartment, and I remember thinking, how could this happen to me again?
Yeah, so again, there's a little bit of shadiness in the way she said, I don't know how many times he hit me. She even had like literal shifty eyes as she was talking about that. I don't know. I'm not going to claim that her eye movements or body language is an indication of anything, but it just seemed a little off from her regular cadence. And she also says, I don't know how many times he hit me. That kind of implies, according to your testimony, he hit you a dozen times, maybe more, or at least, I don't know, 5 or 6 at the very least, maybe 35. And if so, then there would be a mark, right? Probably significant marks. I mean, he's not huge, but he's not small. And if he was holding her down and punching her in the face, I hope you never are in this situation, but there are famous examples like the picture of Rihanna, right? Chris Brown allegedly abused her and the bruises on her face. Those kinds of wounds are unmistakable. The wounds from my memory, bloody lip, black eye, bruises, various different places on the face, a lot of swelling. And it actually doesn't take much to do that. You don't have to hit someone that hard for those kinds of wounds to be present. So if that were true, then there would be evidence of that, and certainly she would have taken a picture of that. She took a picture of the bruise on her arm. So if he had hit her several times, at the very least something on her face, right? And not just a little redness, there would be swelling and blood. Now, we did hear from the nurse that she had a bloody lip that one time. The nurse actually just spotted it. Amber hadn't disclosed that, hadn't been like, look, the nurse just saw that. So could that have been a time where he actually did hit her in the face? Yeah, I could believe that. But as she tells this story, this is one of her prepared stories that her and her team have prepared for. In this story, she tells us that she threw a vase at him, and she even did that thing where when she was on that recording with Johnny of like, I didn't punch you, I hit you. She did a little bit of that right there. She's like, it wasn't a pot, it was more like a vase, or it's in her head. I think she's trying to make it more palatable, but I don't know. But also, you would think if you threw something at someone, you think you would remember what it was. I mean, unless you threw a lot of things at someone, which we know, or we could imagine given a lot of testimony. So anyway, could he have been the main aggressor? Yes.
She thought he was kind of making a joke. I think we all did. Everyone kind of responded at first, like it was a joke, but he was like, hey man, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing? And she kind of giggled and kind of leaned into me more. And I knew in my body just instantly that it wasn't a joke. But she didn't. So she's kind of still attached to my arm when he says it again to her louder. He says, hey man, you think you're touching my fucking girl? You think you're touching my fucking girl? That's my fucking girl. And he gets louder and louder. And she kind of did this thing, half understanding what was going on. I think she kind of started to cry at this point, but she kind of threw up her hands and Johnny grabbed her wrist and kind of twisted it and pulled her into him and said, do you know how many pounds of pressure it takes to break a human wrist?
Okay, compelling story. I think it does fit with some of the other things that we've heard, at least the jealousy and the attachment insecurity I think is there for both of them and for him as well. I think it just presents differently for him. And I I think that he possibly very much had a lot of jealousy and a lot of anger around that, a lot of control, or some control anyway. There's some details to this that just don't seem to fit, but I don't know. Of course, I wasn't there. But again, was he jealous? Was he controlling? Was he verbally abusive? Yeah, I absolutely believe that. We saw plenty of evidence of that from his own account and from the audio recordings and stuff.
Huh? And he kind of held her, and she just looked frozen. And she's crying, and was just denying understanding what was going on. I stepped in. I kind of take Johnny's arm around, kind of take Johnny's hand, and kind of we start communicating. I don't remember if he immediately was.
Now, she said earlier, I didn't show the clip of her recounting how much drugs and alcohol everyone was using, including herself. She admitted to using mushrooms, but who knows what that means. She's admitted to, and we've heard accounts of her drug use being pretty severe. I don't think as severe as Johnny Depp's and as frequent as Johnny Depp's, but could that affect her perceptions? Could that affect her memory? Johnny Depp included. There's little movements that Johnny Depp is making while she's telling the story that he seems to be disputing, sort of with his body language, her story. But could Johnny Depp have been hammered and blacked out and doesn't remember any of this? Yeah, that could be true too.
And he kind of like makes to look into the bathroom. And I gestured to the bathroom, which was to my right. I kind of like gestured to him, and I said, like, what am I hiding, and where am I going to hide it? And we're standing in this little hallway area outside of the bathroom, and he starts, what it feels like patting me down, or saying he's patting me down. I can't recall, but he ripped my dress, the strap top part of my dress. I had just dyed this thing myself pink, and it's just one of those things. I was like, I just finished that dress. And he's like grabbing my breasts, he's touching my thighs, he rips my underwear off, and then he proceeds to do a cavity search.
Okay, this sounds believable as well. I don't know. But I can imagine this happening given the amount of reported cocaine he was using. It's common, if not inevitable, that when you use a lot of cocaine, you will have moments of psychosis that sound like this. I didn't show the whole clip, but she says that he entered the bedroom, he was talking in a way that she didn't really understand what he was saying. She was confused, and he was saying, "Where is it? Tell me where it is. I know you have it." And she's like, what are you talking about? And he kind of gestures to the bathroom, and she's like, "Okay, the bathroom? I don't know. What are you talking about?" Brings her in there. He starts to strip search her, and he does a cavity search. Okay, so that is absolutely traumatizing. If that happened to Amber, absolutely. Her story sounds credible the way she tells it. It is congruent with what we know about Johnny Depp and his drug use. We haven't heard about psychosis happening, but it's very common. And I've treated people who have had episodes like this, and I won't go into detail, but because it would be triggering, but the kinds of things that people are capable of when they are in that state is they're capable of anything. They can be in a state of psychosis and do nothing, but they can also be in a state of psychosis and harm and severely harm their loved ones because these certain thoughts enter their mind and they're in a very agitated state because they are going through withdrawals maybe or something. So could I see this happening? Yeah, absolutely. Does it mean that Johnny Depp, sober-minded, would have done anything like this? I don't think so, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So if this did happen, which I could see, given the amount of drug use and cocaine, particularly he was using, could the statement that I was abused be reasonably stated by Amber Heard, given the First Amendment? Yeah, I mean, in my book.
he said he was looking for his drugs, his cocaine, his coke. I was wondering how somebody who didn't do cocaine and was against it, that was in and of itself causing problems in our relationship. How could I hide? Why would I hide his drugs from, like he was in?
Well, yeah, I mean, she's trying to logic her way out. You can't logic your way out of an abusive moment with someone who is psychotically believing that you have hidden their cocaine in your orifice. So, yeah, I mean, she's like, I don't even use cocaine. Yeah, I mean, you just have to say, oh, well, yeah, I'll tell you a lighter story that I can tell from my clinical practice. There was a couple, actually, that would abuse meth, if I remember right. This was many years ago, and would have occasional psychotic episodes. And what happened to them, I remember this one story being told to me that they both were having various levels, and there was a child at home, and CPS knew about all this stuff. That's why I was involved. And the parents were outside in the surrounding woods, believing that someone was out to get them. Okay, so there was no violence, but the child was very young and being neglected the entire time, and probably terrified because watching their parents act this way. But they, that's one story, and it's not like the marijuana paranoia, right? Where you just, that's in that direction. But amphetamine, meth, cocaine, psychosis can really just be through the roof. Like, there's no reasoning with the person. The person is believing in a reality that does not exist. They can hallucinate, just the whole gamut. Well, while I'm on the topic, I'll tell another story. This one's easier to tell, and I've told this on the podcast before. Again, this was really early in my career. I was doing family therapy, and I was working in a family, and the father came in alone, and I was talking with him, and I didn't know him that well, and I remember I was really trying to build a relationship with him, and he was telling me this story about how he was involved with the mob, and the police were after him, and, the story had a understandable or a believable story. It sounded believable, and I didn't have any reason to disbelieve him. I didn't have any reason to believe he was experiencing a temporary psychotic episode from substance use. He didn't have any indication of psychosis. Not that people do. It's not like the movies usually, but. And then he, so he's telling me about all this really fantastic, or just a lot of criminal stuff, but, grounded in reality, like things that could happen. And then he says, oh, and by the way, and this is like 45 minutes into the session, he's like, by the way, look out that window. See that guy? And I look out my office window, and I see a father coming to the agency with his family, with his kids, presumably for therapy. And I'm like, yeah, and they're getting out of like a minivan or something. And my client's like, that guy works for the FBI. They're watching me. That guy is here. He's acting like he's a dad, but he's here to monitor me, or to, find out what I'm doing. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, because at that point I'm totally believing everything. And I don't typically have psychotic clients because our agency didn't serve that population. So it wasn't something that I thought was a common reality with my clients. So anyway, I'm looking at, and I'm like, really? That's an FBI or a CIA agent, whatever he said. I'm like, and then all of a sudden it just clicked in my head. He's psychotic. Because that's a real common paranoia, is that the authorities are after you, and they're around every corner, and they are monitoring your phone. And certainly it's possible that that's true, but usually it indicates that someone is having an episode. And so he says that, and then my brain, I had a physical sensation of, because all of his stories now, I was seeing them through a new light, and I'm like, oh, he's psychotic. And I remember feeling stupid for not seeing it. I also felt kind of afraid, because I'm thinking, wait, so what's going on? It's very disorienting. Anyway, so that was another story. And, later on, I worked with him, and he came in and said, yeah, I was having an episode of hallucinations and delusions and that kind of thing.
Insinuating that I was doing it or something. It made no sense. And he was telling me we're gonna conduct a cavity search, shall we? Like, just shoved his fingers inside me.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to believe it. It's a very specific story. It would be a weird one to fabricate. If you were fabricating a story, you would think you would fabricate something that was more down to earth. You know, this story is way out there. Plus, if you were fabricating a story, you wouldn't make it so clearly a psychotic episode, right? Because if you're trying to make a case that he was generally abusive, telling a story that was clearly a psychotic episode and not a psychopathic episode or a psychopathic manifestation, you know, it helps your case in that you're telling a story that, at least to me, sounds believable, but it doesn't usually generalize. You know, people that have episodes like this, they don't usually have them very often, and of course when they're sober they don't have these. So, but yeah, I mean, I tend to believe this story. Now, is it calculated and clever as a fox to come up with a story that is so out there that you wouldn't lie about that? I don't know. I'm guessing a lot of people think that.
I just stood there staring at the stupid light. I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. While he did that, he twisted his fingers around. I didn't say, like, stop or anything.
So the next morning,
There is an interesting presentation here, and she knows that she's on the stand, and they've talked about this story over and over and over again, I imagine, which if she did go through something like this and does have PTSD, at least in part because of stuff like this, that would be really rough for someone to do on the stand. There'd be a lot of PTSD triggering, but she is saying this, you know, that her facial expression, the way that she's crying, I don't know, like, if this is just me, but I would believe the whole presentation, but I do tend to believe the story, but I would believe her whole presentation to a greater degree if she just kind of told the story and there wasn't much emotion around it. Now, you know me, if she has emotion around it and it's legit, it makes total sense. And in fact, when Johnny Depp was telling stories, it seemed devoid of emotion, which of course coincides with my conceptualization of him having avoidant attachment style with an underlying preoccupied person that's prone to jealousy. But the way that she is presenting it seems a little drummed up, and I think a lot of people are saying that. Now, is that because she's lying, or is it because she just thinks that she should? Was she coached to do that? Is she used to doing that sort of thing? Of course, this would fit with the histrionic. I'm sure Dr. Curry, if she were to watch this, that she would say that Amber Heard is absolutely drumming up certain facial expressions, because this is some of that shallowness that people will report. Now, the other thing I'll say about histrionic people, is that women in particular, when they report these kinds of real events, if they don't cry, they're often accused of lying, or that there's something fishy about their presentation. Whereas when men make reports of horrible things that happen to them and they don't display any kind of emotion, then there isn't that assumption. So all you got to do is think about Lindy Chamberlain, Amanda Knox, others. She might know that and think, I've got to at least try to come across the way people expect me to come across.
He was, but he was also this other thing. He was also this other thing. And that other thing was awful thing that would come out and take over, and it was, you couldn't see the Johnny I loved underneath it. It was this other thing.
Yeah, I believe this as well. One, because of the splitting that I referred to earlier, and her perceptions of Johnny when she was idealizing and devaluing, but also when people are highly intoxicated, and it sounds like he was highly intoxicated on various things at various times. It sounds like he drank a lot Now, everyone says around him that he never seemed drunk, but I don't know. That sounds questionable to me. Like, I've heard so many people say stuff like that, and when you look at them, you're like, no, you're not. You're hammered, and it's obvious. You're slurring your words. So, alcohol catches up. Now, maybe for some people, they can drink a lot of alcohol before they show signs of it, sure. But the amount of alcohol I'm thinking that he drank, and even according to his own report, and the amount of pain he was in throughout the relationship, that according to him, he would use substances to try to minimize that pain. Of course, all the substance use creates so many other problems. And then, of course, when you're super high on cocaine, you are going to seem like a different person. I mean, if you have you ever been around people that are super high on cocaine, not mild, certainly mild to moderate, they can seem pretty typical of themselves, maybe a little bit more energetic. But if you're super high, I mean, he had a jar of cocaine, which I do not doubt, given the way that he is. And by the way, everything that he's done in his career is thrown in this different light for me. I mean, he was in a movie called Blow, that whole movie, and you just think, oh, he's an actor and he's playing a part, and you're just like, well, and then Fear and Loathing, all that stuff, like, just kind of makes it sad, actually, to me. Then with the amount of opiates he was using, he told us that he wouldn't overuse because that would make him really droopy, but I have a hard time believing that as well. So is it true? Is Amber's account right now truthful? Yeah, absolutely. When I could absolutely be that. It'd be weird if that wasn't true. It'd be weird if that hadn't happened with the amount of drugs he was using. Now, she, of course, also used a lot of substances and probably also became different when she was super intoxicated on something. But now, does that mean that he was the abuser and she was not? No. It just means that she's describing what it was like to be with someone who used a lot of substances often.
And no one told him. No one was honest with him. No one, he'd pass out in his own vomit. He'd lose control of his body. He'd lose control, and everyone would clean up after him. I cleaned up after him.
That's believable, too. I can't imagine that wouldn't be true. With the amount of drug use that he was disclosing, he would need a bunch of enablers around him in order to pick up the pieces. So, yeah, I believe that. And with all the employees he had, and everyone's wanting to hold on to their job, and he was not ready to be sober, and he probably would have fired people, and maybe did, if they ever did confront him on the use. So, yeah, I believe all that.
I mean, this man lost control of his bowels, and I cleaned up after him. His security cleaned up after him, changed his pants in front of me. He would pass out in his own sick. And then he'd walk around saying he didn't have a problem. Until he did. Until he couldn't support it anymore, and he'd get clean, and he'd get sober, and then he...
I will say there's a little bit of a tone to her voice. I don't know if I'm just making it up, and maybe she's doing it for effect. Obviously, she has a big reason to be angry at him, and it would be very frustrating. But there seems to I've seen little clips of her in the UK trial that there's a side of her that's pretty pointed, hostile. I wonder how much of that is involved. Now, remember a while ago I talked about codependency, and the internet doesn't typically understand codependency, but the real personality trait or condition or personality disorder, just in a nutshell, is the individual is compelled to take care of someone who has a problem. They need that in their life, and they're also denying themselves a lot of the time. And there's a lot of anger involved in that, typically, not always. So there's different types of codependent people that I've seen in my career, and also in the research. There are the controlling type. They are typically pretty angry. There's the accommodating type. They're angry, but they're suppressing it. And then there's the chameleon type, who are also suppressing their anger. But the controlling type, which there seemed to be some evidence that Amber might have been that. She called herself codependent to a nurse that she talked to. There was records of that. And I could absolutely imagine that being a quality that she had, again, because she had parents that were that way. I think she was parentified. It's a classic breeding ground for codependent personality. And I imagine that right now that's coming out is that anger, is that rage towards him. It's a weird entanglement that codependent people will have with the chemically dependent individual. The chemically dependent individual will be very sorrowful and shameful and very low self-esteem, particularly in those moments of using a lot. And then the codependent person will subtly or not so subtly put the person down. And what the codependent person thinks they're doing is trying to encourage them to be sober, but they're actually inadvertently shaming the person so that the abuse cycle continues and they can stay locked in on that relationship. So, and again, the codependent person isn't doing it because they just wake up in the morning and say, I want to control someone. They do that because they were programmed as children to believe that their only worth is taking care of someone with a problem.
It was this thing again. This thing that made me feel so loved, that made me feel like my soulmate, as cheesy as that sounds. I just felt like he knew me. And I recognized something in him, either some part of my makeup and my background or something, that I just got it. And I loved him and understood him. It just got so scary, the other part of him.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just seeing things because I'm trying to find evidence for my hypothesis, but the way she talks, it's very similar, as I was saying earlier, to people I've worked with who have borderline personality. The idealization, the evaluations there, the soulmate aspect. Of course, people have soulmates. There's nothing wrong with that. But people with borderline, when they find an attachment figure that they invest in, when they're in love and when things are going well and they're idealizing, it is like all-encompassing love. It is the biggest love that has ever been on the face of the planet, because it's not just romantic and sexual love and companionship love, but it's all the love that you had to give since you were born and were never allowed to have a secure relationship to actually express it. And so soulmate doesn't even capture everything that someone feels when they're in that state.
And in June, I wanted to leave him. I didn't want to leave him. I wanted to leave him. I wanted him to get better. And he expressed to me so many times when he was in that period of getting clean and sober, he would tell me, "You saved my life. Baby girl, you saved my life."
Yeah, all this is believable too. It to some extent coincides with reports that we heard from the Johnny Depp side. The way she describes it, you hear the cadence. There's no evidence of gears turning in her head trying to calculate what she's going to say. She says she wanted to leave him, and then she says, "No, I didn't. I wanted to want to leave him." That all makes sense, and that doesn't necessarily help her case, because it implies that there was a lot of good in Johnny Depp, and she's talking a lot about that. So, if she was really trying to make a case that he's an evil psychopathic abuser, then she would potentially leave the stuff out. But yeah, I totally believe what she's saying here, that, there was so much good. She just really felt the love, but there was this other side that she didn't like. And I've hypothesized that not only were there probable events where he did become a very rageful person as he became more and more intoxicated, the ability to keep the emotions down came out, the ability to keep the trauma down was compromised, and then all the rage comes forward. I could absolutely see that happening. I imagine at least 99% of the time that resulted in him being verbally abusive and very caustic in that way, and not necessarily physically abusive. But I don't know. Occasionally physically abusive, perhaps. But I don't know.
If everyone else was saying it, he was saying it. I thought, just like his other friends who had gotten clean and sober and stayed that way, his older friends, these rock stars that he hung out with that had gotten clean and sober and they had 20, 30 years, something, I thought, and Johnny told me he would be that person, that he was going to be that person.
Oh, what I was going to say earlier was my hypothesis is that not only would he do those things that she is recounting, but that also when he would use it, she felt distant from him, which is natural, and that would trigger her severely and give her even more reason to hate the monster and maybe even to attack him in a codependent, controlling way.
I believed it. I looked at that man twice my age. I was 25, looking at this man twice my age, and I saw hope and promise. I had so much hope.
All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.